Well, first of all, thank you everybody for having me. Thank you, Sam. Thank you everybody for the nice introduction, the welcome. I'm happy to be here, meet some new people. My father actually lives in Florida these days on the Gulf side, and I'm really hopeful that when all this is over, one time when I visit him, I can come up and join you guys in Georgia and see the mushrooms. I've never done any hunting there. I've never been in the woods there. I would love to join you guys in the woods sometime and cook with you there. So
and our morels start end of February, beginning of March.
Oh, oh well, let me mark it on my calendar. So you guys mentioned the book, and I want to talk a little bit about the book, not as a sales pitch, but because it'll explain what I'm going to do for you here today. When I wrote this book, again, I'm a chef, but I'm also an obsessed mushroom hunter. And as a mushroom hunter, I have, when the season's good, my fridge is full of mushrooms, and I have way too many mushrooms all the time, and I don't know what to do with them all. And even though I'm a chef, just like you guys, I found myself always kind of doing the same things with them, where it was always, make pasta, toss it with mushrooms, just mushrooms on eggs on toast, or pizza and mushrooms, or, pick your favorite thing, but it's kind of repetitive is what I found. And I have a mountain of cookbooks and, with online resources these days. And I went looking for ideas. And what I found was that all the recipes related to mushrooms that I would find were very kind of old-fashioned, like kind of 1950s housewife kind of recipes. And there's nothing wrong with those. There's a context in which they're great. But I wanted to do cooking. I wanted to cook mushrooms, in the same sort of styles of food that I was doing in restaurants and, events where I was cooking for people every day. And so what I realized is that I was kind of the person who was qualified to do that book. So I started writing the book very much for that reason. And so the book is very much about kind of exploring different ideas and new ideas for mushrooms. And I'll show you some stuff today that I hope will be new for all of you. And another thing is that there's a lot of old wives' tales, for lack of a better word, and just kind of mythology surrounding how we're supposed to handle mushrooms and treat mushrooms. And I wanted to, it was mentioned that I was an engineer before, and I have a science background. So I wanted to kind of address some of that mythology and, take more of a scientific approach for what's okay and what's not okay when handling mushrooms. So that was also part of the book, and we'll talk about some stuff there. It's not meant to be deeply scientific or confusing, but just enough so you kind of understand that certain things are okay, even if people told you they're not. And finally, the last thing is that there are a lot of very common mushrooms, especially where I live. I live in California, and I don't know the mushrooms back east as I know them from the Rockies and west. I'm really good. On the East Coast, you guys have so many trees that are so strange to me that I'm lost with a lot of your mushrooms. I'm excited to learn, but I'm not there yet. But at least here, we have a lot of mushrooms that are very common that people walk past and ignore, and they're told they're not supposed to like them and they're not supposed to eat them. But a lot of those mushrooms in other cultures are highly prized. And I really wanted to explore some of those mushrooms and what other cultures do with them. And so that's also part of what the book is. Usually when I do these presentations face to face, a lot of the presentation is about you guys tasting stuff. So it's not just me talking about food, it's you tasting things as I go. So unfortunately, I can't really do that today. But I love to make people taste some of the weird mushrooms that people tell them they're not supposed to like. Unfortunately, our season so far here should be in full swing now, and we've had a very dry season so far. So we don't have a lot of variety right now. I would normally be trying to show you a bunch of cool different variety. I do have one or two fun things to show you though. But anyway, so all that is what kind of brought the book together. And so that is my focus when I'm showing you these things. I want to kind of open your mind to new things. If I'm not going to show you how to saute mushrooms and mix them with pasta, or how to, make a risotto, or how to make a stir fry. You guys know how to do that. You don't need me to show you that. I want to show you some new ideas that you hopefully haven't seen or thought of, that are still really easy, fun things and kind of delicious new stuff that you can do. So before I jump into cooking, I'll say one last thing. For those of you who don't know me or who haven't seen my presentations before, I think it's not very interesting for you if I just cook one thing for an hour. I think it's and if I'm just talking at you for an hour. So I think it's more fun for you, and it's more fun for me too, if I can show you a bunch of different things. So I have 4, hopefully 5 things I'm going to show you today. And because of that, I'm going to jump around a lot. To get all that stuff done in an hour, a little more than an hour, I'm going to jump around a lot. So I know at times I might lose you. I encourage you guys to interrupt me as much as you want. If we were face to face, I would say just raise your hand and speak up. In this format, it gets a little bit disorderly. So in this format, Sam mentioned, just use the chat function. If you type in questions in the chat, Rosa, my partner who's filming me here, she can read them to me as they come in. So please don't be shy about doing that. Anytime you have a question, if it's directly about something I'm doing, if it's something you missed, or if it's just something that's a little bit, off topic, but it's related to the mushroom stuff, feel free to ask and we'll talk about it. It's much more fun if I'm talking about something that I know you guys are interested in. And if you have a question, somebody else there probably has the same question. So please don't be shy. On that note, I'm going to start cooking. And the first thing that I want to show you guys today is a version of ceviche. And if you're familiar, you don't have to worry too much about that. Sorry. If you're familiar with ceviche, or if you're not familiar with ceviche, all over Latin America and the Caribbean, there's different versions of it. And the idea is you have usually lime juice, but sometimes other acidic liquids are used to marinate fish or some other kind of seafood. And you start with raw seafood, and the acidic marinade actually cooks the seafood, cooks the fish. And what really happens is the acids denature the proteins. But in the ceviche I'm going to make you today is with mushrooms. And mushrooms don't have proteins giving them the structure. The structure of mushrooms is much different. So the acid's not going to break them down the way it would for seafood. So the first thing I'm going to do is something many of you have been probably taught not to do, and that's to boil mushrooms. I have a bunch of mushrooms here. I have some water that's boiling. I'm going to add a little bit of salt to it. And I'm going to just throw these mushrooms in for a few minutes and let them go. And real quickly, somebody's going to ask, these mushrooms, I didn't have a lot of wild stuff. So these are actually cultivated mushrooms I'm using for the ceviche. The common name for them, they're beach mushrooms or shimeji. They call them clamshell mushrooms or piapini. There's a million names for these mushrooms. But they've become pretty common, at least around here, in the kind of chef sampler or gourmet sampler kind of packs of mushrooms you see at your fancy markets or fancy mushroom suppliers. But this ceviche that I'm doing, I have done with a lot of different mushrooms. One of my favorite mushrooms I've done this with, I saw behind Sam when we logged in, he had some Caesar's amanitas behind him. I think it's Jacksonii is the one that's where you guys live. But the Caesar's amanitas are a great mushroom to do this with. It works great with oysters. I've done this with Parisiums, with lobster mushrooms, with all the mild Rucola, it works well. You can use it with whatever you have on hand. It tends to work really well. But back to the reason behind boiling the mushrooms. When mushrooms, the structure in mushrooms comes from a chemical called chitin, and chitin is the same thing that gives structure to crab shells and insect shells. It's not something that acid is going to have any effect on. If you don't believe me, take a crab shell and squeeze some lime juice on it and come back and see what happens after a day or two. I promise you, it will still look like a crab shell. So if you need to break down the structure of the mushrooms a little bit, I like boiling them like this. Doesn't change the flavor very much, and it makes the texture a lot more pleasant. And even for mushrooms that you could safely eat raw, I would always boil them for this kind of a preparation. For the ceviche, I would always give them the parboiled first. And again, mushrooms are a little different than plants. Plants get their structure from cellulose, which is just a starch. And if you've ever boiled a vegetable, if you boil it for a long time, it kind of disintegrates and turns to mush. The difference with a mushroom, the difference between boiling it for 3 minutes and boiling it for 30 minutes, there pretty much is no difference. The texture is going to be the same. As soon as the cell walls burst, they hold their texture. So don't be afraid, I guess is what I'm saying, to boil some mushrooms. For a lot of cultures, it's very standard. In Eastern Europe, they boil a lot of mushrooms. In Asia, they boil a lot of mushrooms. In Scandinavia, they boil a lot of mushrooms. It's mostly just Western Europe where they don't do it so much. So right now, these have been in the water boiling for a couple minutes while I babble at you. They don't need much more. They're in small pieces. And I just want to kind of move along here, so I'm gonna pop them out of the water, and bear with me for 1 second while I do that. And I'm just gonna rinse them under cold water here for a second, just to kind of cool them down. One thing people always ask me about is, do mushrooms lose a lot of flavor when you boil them? And I have always found that they hold their flavor pretty well when you boil them. A lot of mushrooms will lose if they have really colorful pigments in them. Those can be water soluble, but the flavor actually holds pretty well. Yeah, sorry.
There's a question. Do you have different boiling times for different species?
So the first thing is, for this recipe, the important part is that the mushroom is cooked through. As long as the mushroom is cooked through, you're fine. If you're using a mushroom that needs to be cooked thoroughly to be safely edible, such as like a honey mushroom, for example, Armillaria species, those mushrooms I would boil for at least 5 to 7 minutes just to make sure they're thoroughly cooked, because if just again, certain mushrooms, if they're not thoroughly cooked, can make you really sick. These mushrooms, you can see after I boil them, they still have quite a firm texture. They still look like mushrooms. They didn't disintegrate. And me leaving them in the water for another 10 minutes wouldn't have changed anything. So to do the ceviche, all I'm going to do, I'm just going to start by marinating it. I'm going to take, I have lime juice. This is just lime juice. I just squeezed a few limes before I got on the call. I'm going to pour that over the mushrooms. I have some hot chili here, and you can use whatever peppers you like. I usually use serranos because I just find them to be kind of the perfect heat level for this. I had kind of a special thing for this that I'm using, which I'll explain later. And I'm just going to put a pinch of salt in there.
There's a question.
And I'm just going to mix this up and let it marinate for a while I move on to other things, and we'll come back to it after a while.
There's a question. When you cook the lobster mushrooms, how long did you boil them?
Okay, so I think maybe one of you was here when I did this with lobster mushrooms. Last time I had some lobsters that I used for this recipe. And for those, I cooked them about 5 minutes, I boiled them. If they're cut in small pieces, they don't take very long to cook through. If you're boiling them and they're whole or in big pieces, you need to give them more time. But if you see how small, I'm cutting these in pretty small pieces. When the pieces are this small, just, aim for about 5 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes is plenty for something this small, unless it's something you're worried isn't safe to eat if it's undercooked. And if you're not sure about that, err on the side of boiling it an extra couple minutes. It won't hurt anything. So having said that, I'm going to let that marinade go, and I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk about a couple other things. So I have some chanterelles, which I was lucky enough to get some chanterelles. So these are from a little north of here, but Northern California and Southern Oregon, these came from. But I have a bunch of these that have been cleaned up. And I'm going to show you, I love to talk about cream of mushroom soup. And it's one of those things that every mushroom hunter has. Almost every mushroom hunter I know does some version of cream of mushroom soup. And it's really become kind of a pet peeve of mine, because it's one of those things that most people I know use this kind of they use a roux and, with flour and fat to make a roux, and then they use that to thicken something with lots of heavy cream and other things. And in the kitchens I've worked in over the last however many years, I don't really know anybody who makes creamy soups like that anymore. It works, but it's kind of very heavy, and the flour kind of mutes some of the flavors. So I want to show you guys a method that's a little more in line with what I do in kitchens. And this works not just with mushrooms. You can do this with all kinds of vegetables. It works really well for a lot of things. But this method I'm going to do, you'll see it's ridiculously easy. You're going to see me putting it together, and you're not going to believe it until you see me blend it and it's going to come together. But I'm going to start by just dry sauteing the chanterelles here. They're a little bit wet, so or they're probably a lot wet, but they've been sitting out for a couple days, so I suspect that they might not give off quite as much water. So anyway, I have a really hot pan here, and I'm just adding the chanterelles. And I should talk for a second about a dry saute. You're probably familiar with the dry saute, but just in case anybody is not, the idea is that because most wild mushrooms are very wet, when you roll them in and start sauteing them, they give off a ton of water, and you wind up with kind of a soupy mess.
Something's happened to your audio, Chad.
The audio is coming out good.
Yeah, it's very reedy, thin sounding.
Yeah, we're just trying muting and unmuting, see if that helps at all. Is that any better?
No, there's something.
Something happened.
Yeah, something happened to the microphone.
Because this happened when somebody else was talking earlier. We were hearing it on somebody else's. I don't know if it's a bandwidth thing.
Let's mute. We're gonna mute for 10 seconds again.
Is anyone else on your internet right now? Nope. Okay.
So
Is it better now?
yeah, so let me
Nope.
it's a little better now.
Well, it's really tinny sounding.
I can try and grab another phone, but I feel like this is a Zoom issue, not a phone issue.
Log off and log back on.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You want to try, it may help to log, Sam was saying it might help to log off and log back on. Oh, someone else said it too. There's a couple people. Oh, it sounds okay to you?
Yeah, we'll leave and come back.
Okay.
Okay, we'll be ready to admit you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
Okay. Are we here again?
Much
It's much
better.
better.
Okay. Sorry about that. So again, Zoom, it seems like in big Zoom meetings, Zoom has bandwidth issues. So I get back to the soup here. So the beginning of this soup, I'm dry sauteing chanterelles, and all I threw into this pan was just chanterelles in a very hot pan. I put a pinch of salt in too, and if you can see the pan, it's just filled with all the liquid that's coming out of the chanterelles. And it smells amazing, all that fruity aroma from the chanterelles. I'm just going to let this liquid reduce down, and it'll take a few minutes. I don't want to turn the fan on because it'll just add a whole lot of noise. Excuse me. But I'm going to let this go for a minute, and then I'll show you how to keep going on the soup. But again, this cream of mushroom soup, there's no roux. I'm not even going to use any cream. I'm just going to use chanterelles, olive oil, water, and a little bit of seasoning, and that's it. And you'll see it'll come out super rich, super creamy, really flavorful, which unfortunately you won't be able to taste, so you'll just have to take my word on that. But you'll see how insanely simple it is. It's way easier than however you've been making cream of mushroom soup, I promise you that. And I think it'll taste more like mushrooms than anything you've ever done before too. So I have something else going on in this other pan, which I'll explain to you in a couple minutes. I want to just get the soup going a little further. Does anybody have any questions about anything else before I start babbling on about other things here? So all right. So I'll let me start talking then about what's in this pan. So where Rosa comes from is Catalonia, which is kind of the northeastern region of Spain along the Mediterranean, and they have the Pyrenees Mountains, and it is a culture that is absolutely obsessed with mushrooms. They are obsessed with wild mushrooms and mushroom hunting more than any other culture in Western Europe, more than the Italians, more than the French. You get to Eastern Europe and you have the Russians and Poles and others, and like then they'll have a claim to that title.
They're asking what kind of wine you're drinking.
Oh, so this is from a local wine. We have a local vineyard, Santa Cruz Mountain Vineyards, and they make a bunch of really nice wines. So this is a Dorif, which is and it's another word for Petit Syrah. But yeah, you guys make me nervous, so I had to have a sip of wine while I talk to you.
Okay, you were.
But so in Catalonia, where Rosa's from, they're crazy about mushrooms. And when her sister, like 5 years back or so, was vacationing in the Pyrenees somewhere, and she was in this village where a lot of people go for mushroom hunting. It's an area that's a well-known place for mushroom hunting in the Pyrenees. And there was a shop she went to there that had all kinds of different mushroom products. And one of the products they had, or one of the things they had, was a huge selection of different kind of jams and preserves and things like that made from mushrooms. I'm going to hold this thought for one second. Like I promised, I'm going to jump around a lot. So the wine that I'm not drinking is the box wine. And actually I'm ahead of myself. Maybe I had too much of the wine. So the liquid is out of the mushrooms here. I'm just going to add some fat. I'm just adding a bit of olive oil in here, just enough to coat the bottom of the pan, really. So I just don't want the mushrooms to stick. The chanterelles, I just want to get a little color on these. I don't want to brown them too much. Chanterelles, in my experience, if you brown them too much, they lose a lot of that really wonderful fruity kind of essence they have. So I kind of just want to get a little bit of color on them. So I'm just going to let them go for a few minutes like this, and then I'll show off my fancy box wine to you. But for now, I'm just going to let those brown. So what I was saying, so her sister went and they had all these different mushroom jams and preserves. And one of And so she sent us a few of these jams and preserves for us to try. And I had never seen anything like it. It just totally blew my mind. And I really was curious to start playing with that kind of idea with all the mushrooms I had locally. So I believe the first one that we had was actually Marasmius aurates, the fairy ring mushroom, was the first one that we tried that she sent us, which I wish was more common near here, but I never seem to find it. So today what I want to show you, what I have started in this pan, is going to be a jam made from black trumpets. And I chose this for a couple reasons, but one of those reasons is I believe that you guys have lots of black trumpets there, just like we do here. So in a good year, in a good season, you go to the right spot and you can kind of bring a wheelbarrow to harvest the black trumpets because they pretty much carpet the floor. So I think this is kind of a fun way to use them. It's a little different. For this recipe, now, Rosa, if you want, you can show the pan. What I've been doing in this pan, it's not very fun for you guys to watch or wait for, so I started before we started talking. But I've just been caramelizing some onion and fennel. So just some onion and fennel that I rough chopped and threw it in a pan and just been on low heat and slowly cooking it down. I'm going to let it go a few more minutes. As soon as I get the soup going, then I'll show you how to really get this going. But the first part is just get these onions and fennel caramelized a little bit. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Just, you want them cooked through and you want them to get some of that sweetness they get. So the chanterelles here now, like I said, I didn't want to brown them a whole lot because with chanterelles, I don't think they benefit from a lot of browning. So I'm going to hit this now with my fancy box wine. And a good tip for you, if you want wine for cooking, box wine is usually a lot cheaper. And it's generally good enough for cooking in my experience. So I put in the pan there probably, I don't know, a quarter cup of wine, give or take. Maybe a half cup, something like that, somewhere between there. The amount is not that important. You don't have to use white wine. You can use cognac or brandy. You can use whiskey. You can use beer. Use whatever you like. Let your taste be your guide and your cabinet for that matter. The important part is just make sure it's something that's going to taste good with whatever mushrooms you're using. This recipe for cream of mushroom soup will work good with pretty much any mushroom that you like the flavor of sauteed. It's going to be good with this kind of recipe. It'll make really nice soup like this. I have done it with too many different kinds of mushrooms to name right now. So I added the wine, and all I'm doing is I want to kind of scrape up any kind of ground on bits from the pan I want to scrape off. And I want to just kind of reduce the wine down so it's absorbed into the mushrooms and just reduced away. And then I'm just going to add water to the pan and let it cook off. And usually what I would do is I would just use tap water. I would just literally use this fancy water here. But since I just boiled some mushrooms, I have this liquid, which has actually got a little bit of mushroom flavor in it already. So I'm going to use that because I think it'll add a little bit of flavor to the soup. And so I'm just pouring that in. The amount really doesn't matter that much. Use more than you think you need, because all you're going to do, we're going to bring it up to a boil now. And we're going to just let it simmer for a few minutes and get the flavors in there and just reduce down a little bit. And then we're going to blend it up. So if you have too much water, all it means is you're going to cook it down a little more. That's all. It's not going to hurt anything. So don't worry about a measurement. And you don't have to use water. If you want, you can use mushroom stock. You can use chicken stock or broth. You can use whatever you want. If you want to use cream, this is not the point to add it. We'll get there later. I'll show you. So this is already, because the pan was really hot, this liquid was hot, it's coming up to a boil already. I'm going to just lower the heat on it for a moment, just so it kind of simmers a little bit instead of boiling over while I'm not looking. And I'm going to move on. So back to the trumpet jam now. So I told you I was going to make a black trumpet jam. So I have these onions and fennel that have been caramelizing for a while, and they're actually starting to get caramelized pretty nicely. Here I have these are black trumpets that I had dried ones, and they are they've been reconstituted. I have the soaking liquid separate, so I'm adding these. They've been soaked and cleaned and reconstituted, so that's going in the pan. I'm also going to add some brown sugar because, again, this is a jam. I want it to be sweet, and I'm going to add some vinegar. This is actually apple cider vinegar. You can use whatever vinegar you like. I'm going to add about a quarter cup of vinegar, more or less. You can taste it as it cooks, and kind of you can taste the liquid to see if you need to adjust it. And I'm going to add, this is the soaking liquid from the black trumpets here. So I'm assuming everybody is familiar with black trumpets, but if you're not, this is the scientific name is Chanterelles phallax, I believe, where you guys are. Where we are, we have a different species that's a little different. It's all of the different, and the one we have here is about the longest species name you will ever see. It's like Chanterelles calicornicopioides, and if you can say that 3 times fast, I'll give you a prize. But all of the black trumpets, regardless of which species you get, they're all really, really flavorful mushrooms. They're all worth your time. So I want to talk a little bit about, I said that, or go ahead, sorry.
There's a question about storing the box wine. If you always store it over the fridge, and what's the room temperature?
Oh, so the box wine is pretty much sealed. I wouldn't store my good wine up on the fridge like that, but I don't really worry too much. It doesn't go bad. I'm sure it doesn't benefit it storing it up there, but it doesn't go bad. I use the box wine just for cooking, so I don't worry about it too much, as long as it's not vinegar.
How much brown sugar you add?
So for this recipe here, I added, there's about 1 onion, like half a bulb of fennel, and them cooked down, and it's about 1/2 to 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar, depending on your taste and how sweet you want it. Again, it's about a 1/4 cup of vinegar. I used apple cider. A lot of times I use sherry vinegar for this, but you can use wine vinegar. You can use rice vinegar. Any vinegar will work. They'll all have slightly different character in the end, but they're all good. And then on top, I just poured the soaking liquid. And I forgot to turn the heat up. This will take a lot less time if I turn the heat up now. So now I just want to concentrate this down. I'm just going to simmer it down and reduce that until the liquid is mostly absorbed back in. And then all the flavors will come together, and we'll blend it up and we'll have a jam. I wanted to talk a little bit about using dried mushrooms. I poured all the soaking liquid on there. With black trumpets grow really slowly, and they're just big funnels open in the woods that take days and days and days to grow. So they tend to be filthy dirty. So they need to be cleaned, and you need to strain the water really well before you use it. The soaking liquid, and we have, like, I always strain it like through this is a tea strainer, so it gets all the little grit and dirt out of there really well. But when you're using any dried mushrooms, my point is that the soaking liquid has as much flavor as the dried mushrooms do after you reconstitute them. So it's really important, use the soaking liquid. If you're cooking with wine in the recipe, reconstitute them in the wine, and then the flavors in the wine. If you're cooking with stock, reconstitute them in the stock, and then the flavors in the stock. If you're just using water, use that soaking liquid. And if you don't have a use for the soaking liquid in that recipe, you can always save it. You can reduce it down, just put it in a little pan like this and just reduce it down until it fits in a small container. You can freeze it in ice cube trays, and then you have little concentrated mushroom stock you can throw into any recipe. But the point is, the soaking liquid from dried mushrooms is gold. Don't waste it. It's very, very flavorful. It's a really good thing to have. So on that note, I'm gonna let all this stuff just cook. So the soup here, you can see, I'm gonna just taste this right now to see if it needs salt. Because I salted this water before I boiled the mushrooms, before it had a good amount of salt, so I don't think this needs salt. Right now, this already tastes like a very flavorful mushroom soup. And remember, the only thing in it is some chanterelles, a little bit of oil, and water, a splash of wine, water, and salt. That's it. There's nothing else in that pan. So I'm gonna let that go for a little while, and I'm gonna talk about how to finish the ceviche. So I promised you I was gonna jump around a lot. Now here's proof. So the ceviche, if you remember before, we had boiled these mushrooms, and with the boiled mushrooms, we marinated them with lime juice and some chile and a little bit of salt. And that's all that's in here right now. I just want to taste this and see how the salt level is. It's going to need some salt, so a little pinch of salt in there. And I'm going to show you right now how to finish this. And you can see inside my very full and messy fridge. If Rosa's not careful with the camera work.
I am.
So to finish this, I'm going to do a few things here. First, in this container, all I have is just some onions. I just have red onions that I sliced really thin, and I'm going to toss those in. And in this container, the person who taught me how to make ceviche insisted that with the onions, you soak them in cold water. And what that does is it keeps them really crispy. It makes them extra crispy, so you get the texture in the ceviche. And the other thing is it takes a little bit of the raw edge off the onions, so they're not quite as sharp with the raw onion taste. I think Rosa has a question.
There's a question about the kind of salt you use. If it's kosher, what brand is it?
So for salt, I always use kosher salt because I'm used to it. There's no right or wrong answer for salt. Use whatever you're comfortable with. I use kosher salt because every kitchen I worked in always had kosher salt. So that's just what I buy. I know without even thinking about it, I reach in, I know what it feels like in my hand, and I know how that translates to the dish. If use whatever, the important thing with salt is use what you're used to, get used to using the same thing, because seasoning things with salt is really the difference. It's one of the main differences between really skilled cooks and not skilled cooks. That's the little detail that brings all the flavors out properly. So the important part is to be consistent. Just use something you're used to. Just use something consistently. If you like sea salt, use sea salt. It's not important. If you like whatever. I never use iodized salt because to me the iodized salt always has a funny taste. The iodine just gives things a funny taste. So I don't use that, but you use whatever works for you. There's not a right or wrong answer for that. So back to the ceviche. I mentioned that a lot of different cultures have versions of ceviche, and I've always been a huge fan of Peruvian ceviche. It's one of the simplest, and it's I just think it's really simple and nice, and it's all about nice ingredients handled perfectly. And so I came up in kitchens where one of my mentors was a Peruvian chef, and he's the one who taught me how to make ceviche. So this version that I'm showing you is more or less exactly the same as what he taught me many years ago, only instead of using raw fish, we're using the mushrooms that we boil. So what I just did there is I just sliced some cilantro. So again, right before we're serving this, I just have the onion, the raw onion, and the cilantro that I'm mixing in here right before I serve it. And I'm not adding anything else to this. Peruvian ceviche, they always put a really starchy garnish. Almost everywhere I've ever seen Peruvian ceviche, they serve it with boiled sweet potato. And that's what this is. It's just boiled sweet potato that I'm putting on the plate. They have some other garnishes which are really hard to find if you don't live near a lot of good kind of Latin markets that carry South American kind of ingredients. So it's not worth getting into those garnishes. If you have the sweet potato, it'll be really good. But that's it. So in the bowl, again, it was the mushrooms that are boiled, marinated in lime juice and chile with some salt. And then when I'm ready to serve it, I just mixed in the red onion, the thinly sliced red onion and cilantro. And I'm gonna just serve that on top of the boiled sweet potato. And it's really that easy. It's a super simple dish. It's really beautiful. It's colorful. It's delicious. And all that liquid in there, all this liquid that you see is the Peruvians actually call it leche de tigre, which means tiger's milk. And it's a highly prized thing. If you go to Peruvian restaurants, if you ever go to a Peruvian restaurant, they'll often serve the leche de tigre as actually a drink on its own, or as it's something they mix into drinks too. It's one of the things, usually whoever gets the end of the ceviche winds up just picking up the bowl and drinking the leche out of the bowl. So I actually had to stop and get a spoon. So this is the part where usually I would pass it out for you guys to taste, but since you can't, I get to eat it, and you have to trust me on how good it is. It's pretty delicious. So I guess I can't eat the whole thing right now.
There's a question if people don't have access to South American ingredients, what can they use to substitute? Kind of chile with kind of.
Oh, so you don't need any special ingredients. Is exactly the point of this. The special South American ingredients are garnish things, which are not important. There's a special kind of corn called Cusco corn that's really giant kernels, and it's not sweet at all. It's really starchy and chewy that you'll see often as a garnish. But you don't need that. For this, I usually use serrano peppers. You can use jalapenos if you like it really hot. Actually, the Peruvian chef who taught me, when he couldn't get the traditional Peruvian chilies he would use habanero, so if you like it really hot, do that. But use whatever chilies you have. It's not that important. Just use, it should be a little spicy, but what that means is different for every person. So put a chili that gives it a level of spice that makes you sweat a little bit, but doesn't hurt you.
So the question is, what ingredients to look for besides the chocolate corn? If they cannot have that, what other ingredients? What ingredients do you have?
So again, this is super simple.
List your ingredients.
Again, super simple. So as a garnish, I have the sweet potato, which is just diced up and boiled.
Mm-hmm.
Use any sweet potato you want. This is just the regular sweet potato that I got at the supermarket. There's
Chad,
yes.
Chad, this is actually Cornelia asking this. We do have some South American markets with esoteric
awesome.
ingredients.
Okay.
We do have access.
Yeah.
I was trying to ask, what should we look for that's weird and esoteric that normally you would serve with this if you were in Peru?
Freezer that I can show you. If
Cool.
I can do it here. My freezer is so overpacked, I don't know if I can find it very quickly. But the short answer is the chocolate corn is what you want. And it's chocolate corn, they'll sell it frozen. And chocolate corn, again, is these giant kernels. And it's really chewy, it's really starchy.
Do
If you
put
can find it, you just kind of boil it and cool it down and serve that as a garnish. But
instead of the sweet potato or with the
no,
sweet
it's
potato?
not. So all of what I showed you would remain the same. If you have the choclo corn, you would put a little bit of that on top or on the side.
What about the chile?
So the chile is the other thing, and that I do have. So we have, because we live in an area with a huge Latin population. So the really traditional chilies in Peru. So all chilies in Peru they call ají. That's their word for chile in Peru is ají. And so the one that's traditionally used for ceviche is called ají limo. So ají limo is the one that's really traditional for ceviche. And we could talk about Peruvian ingredients and chiles for hours, actually. There's some really, really cool chiles from Peru that are worth exploring. But these chiles, this is what the ají limo looks like. And this is what I actually used for it today because I knew I had them in the freezer.
Cool.
But a lot of times I'll just use serranos. And
Thank
we'll
you
see
for that.
when we're done. I'll see if I can dig out. I don't want to stop my presentation right now to dig for the Cusco, for the choclo corn.
Oh, choclo.
But the choclo corn, I'm pretty sure I have some of that in my freezer that I can show you at the end. I'll dig for it.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, so I'm gonna move this aside so I don't sit here and eat it for you nonstop. And that's kind of spicy. It's making my nose run a little bit. So excuse me. All right. So I want to get back to this stuff here. And actually, maybe now.
And there's a question, how many chiles would you use?
So how many chilies would you use is a personal question.
Chad would use a lot.
That's like asking what size shirt should you wear. It's really, it's up to you how spicy you like it. And it depends a lot on which chili you use. I like it spicy, so I used, for this little bit of ceviche I made, I used 3 of those chilies. And Rosa's gonna be probably, grimacing at me when she gets to eat it in a little while.
There's a question, do you use it, serve it as a salad? Do you serve it with tortillas?
So traditionally with the ceviche in Peru, they would serve it just like this by itself. With just a nice cold drink and that's it. I would serve it as a starter, just as kind of a first course instead of a salad. If you're using the mushrooms, it actually, I mean, yeah, they're not vegetables, but it takes the place of a salad course really nicely. And I've served it actually as an hors d'oeuvre too, where you can put it on like a little leaf and kind of a past hors d'oeuvre to people to pick up. It works really. Excuse me, it works really well for that as well. So anything else while I'm, no? Okay. So
You were talking about the amount of chiles when
sorry. So yeah, the amount of chilies, there's no right or wrong answer on the amount of chilies. Chilies, everybody has kind of different sensitivity to chilies. And it depends a lot on how spicy the chilies are if you're using it. If you have a really high heat tolerance, then, you can use, a bunch of serranos, a handful of serranos for a small amount, or 1 habanero or something like that. Whereas if you have a low heat tolerance, 1 jalapeno is probably enough for you. So just kind of use your judgment on what you know yourself and your audience. Make sure you're not making it too hot for whoever's got to eat it, but make sure it's hot enough that whoever's eating it is going to get a little bit of that bite, because it's part of it should have a little bit of spice to it. It's part of the balance of flavors, really, to make it work. So I want to let this go for another minute. So I had something else that I wasn't planning on when I was planning this the other day, but I was out in the woods and I was lucky enough to find something really fun. And I looked it up and I realized it's something that you guys have there as well. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with it or eat it. I cut this in half, so you only get to see half of it. Pretend my hand's a mirror. But, so this is actually, it's a beefsteak mushroom, or some people, there's a lot of different names for it, but it's fistulina And the species here is Hepatica. I'm not sure, I believe it's also called Hepatica where you are, although I'm not clear, it's actually
Yes.
the same species.
Yeah.
But so this mushroom, it's a really, really cool mushroom. You can see where I sliced into it before, it looks like it's a bleeding, it looks like it's a piece of meat that kind of bled out. And it's a really beautiful mushroom. It grows as a polypore, just as kind of a shelf on the side of trees or dead wood. I believe there it grows with oak trees.
What is the season for beefsteaks?
I don't know the season there. Somebody there is going to have to answer that.
Or
one.
here?
Here, the season is kind of the fall for these. So
It's
here
the fall here too. It's in the fall also.
Yeah.
This was done one like last month or the month before, right? Maybe the month before.
Yeah, here they're kind of fall and occasionally early winter, but usually fall. And here they grow with a tree that's called a chinkapin, which is kind of related to chestnuts and stuff. It's an interesting tree, but I believe near where you guys are in Georgia, they grow with oak trees. And I'm not sure, and you probably have 30 varieties of oak trees locally, so I'm not sure which ones.
More than 30, but
Yes,
yes,
you have more than I'm comfortable with. that I'm confident in. So I want to cut into this so you can see again. So you can see how it stained very red before. If I cut into the side, one of the things that makes it much. I'm sorry.
I think you need to hold it up a little closer to the.
Oh yeah, sorry. So where I cut into it, you can see the side. So this is where I freshly cut it. And this is the one that had been oxidizing for a long time. So you can see it oxidizes to like a kind of almost a bloody color. It looks like a piece of meat. One of the things that makes this mushroom so cool is that it's one of the few mushrooms that people actually recommend and encourage you to eat raw. And I just wanted to show you how simple it is to prepare. All I did was just clean this off. Just kind of a quick rinse under cold water to kind of get the, the stuck on pine needles and stuff off of it. And it pretty much is kind of instant sashimi. You can look like a sushi chef just by slicing up pieces of it. This is kind of just my wasabi soy sauce mix here. And it's really, I don't want to do anything fancy with this because I so rarely find them that when I do, I just really want to taste them. They actually make great jerkies too, though. If you find a lot of them, they make probably the best mushroom jerky I've ever had was made with beef steaks. The texture is really good, but you can see they actually wind up looking just like sashimi, and you can serve them as that. They're so good. They're so easy to deal with, and they're so pretty. They're kind of, when you see that cross section, again, this is the side that I just sliced, and you can see it's just slowly turning that reddish color. They are attention grabbers. Anytime somebody sees a cross section of this mushroom on a plate, they stop what they're doing to look at it. It's just a beautiful mushroom. So, again,
do you have a jerky recipe in the book?
I don't have a jerky recipe in the book because that is one thing that there's lots of online and around. And in the book, I wanted to focus on things that people probably hadn't seen before. Okay. So I don't, but anyway.
How would you do it?
So to make a jerky, really, all you do is with whatever mushroom you have, you want to kind of just get it to the appropriate size pieces, which different people will tell you different things. A lot of people take oyster mushrooms and just, they'll take the small oyster mushrooms that they grow and they'll just leave them whole. A lot of people cut strips with them, but you can marinate it in anything you like. I usually like to use kind of like soy mixed with some kind of sweetener because I like that kind of teriyaki kind of flavor. But you can marinate it with anything you like, then drain the marinade out and just dehydrate it. That's really it. It's really that easy. depending on the recipe, sometimes people cook the mushrooms before they dehydrate them, sometimes they don't. It depends a lot on the specific mushroom. It just depends on the specific mushroom. Anyway, the beefsteak, I just wanted to show you guys, for me at least, this is a mushroom. I'm lucky if I find one a year. So when I find one, it's always a really special, happy thing for me. And I thought it would be fun to share that with you guys. If they're more common for you guys there, then I'm sorry to bore you with this. But again, for me, they're really fun, special thing to share when I get them. So anyway, on that note, I'm going to move back and I'm going to show you how to finish the soup. And it's really, really simple. So the first thing is, I'll remind you because I haven't talked about it in a little while. In this pan, I just had the chanterelles, which I dry sauteed, hit with a little bit of white wine, and then just covered them with water, and just, you know, check the seasoning for salt. That's all I put in this pan. And actually, I forgot. I went and I picked some thyme from my garden. I was gonna throw some thyme in here, and I forgot to. So better late than never, right? So I have some thyme from my garden. I'm gonna throw it into the blender with this. So anyway, you can see that's what's going in the blender. That was what was simmering in that pan for a while. And all I'm gonna do now, first thing is I'm just gonna blend this until it's fairly smooth. And you'll see, I'm gonna ask Rosa to mute the microphone so I don't blow anybody's ears out. So I guess talk amongst yourself for 20, 30 seconds and feel free to gather your questions up on the chat, and I'll be back in a moment.
So Marcia Cohen came in a little bit later. She asked me to put the name of Chad's book up in the chat, which I just did. I know when we purchased the book from Chad, we actually did kind of a bundle and purchased directly from him, which helps him out more than if you buy it through Amazon. So just letting you know that.
Okay, so you can unmute for a second.
Mm-hmm. You are.
Okay. Okay, so now you can see I've got basically a cream mushroom soup. I haven't even added any fat in here. Now at this point, I just tasted it because there was plenty of salt in the water. I don't need to adjust the seasoning at all. If you want the soup thicker, all you do is just reduce the water down further. That's all. Just reduce the water a little further and it'll get thicker. If you don't want it, if you want it thinner, just add a little more water. So to finish the soup, all I'm going to do is blend it a little more and pour in my fat. And in this case, again, I'm only using olive oil. I'm just using extra virgin olive oil. If you want to use cream, use cream. If you want to use, I think if you want to go creamy, I would just use half and half. It'll be plenty of fat. But it's really that easy. I'm going to turn, again, I'm going to ask Rosa to mute the volume again, and I'll show you. I'm just going to put in a little bit of olive oil here while I blend to emulsify the fat in, and that'll give it a little more richer texture and flavor, and that's it. So bear with me for 10 seconds, and Rosa. want me to? So, all right, so right now, I actually usually make it a little thicker than this, but I didn't want to wait much longer. But you can see how rich and creamy this looks. And again, it's basically just mushroom, salt, and a little bit of wine. And there's not really much else in there except the olive oil. The question was to reduce it to make it thicker. If you want it thicker, just put it into the pan and let it reduce down and just put it back on the heat for a little while and let some of the liquid evaporate off. That's all you want to do. And even if you decide after you blend it, if you decide you want to make it a little thicker, you can do the same thing. Just put it back in a pan and put it on low heat and just let it evaporate down a little bit and it'll get thicker. If you do it after you blend it, you might need to throw, like, kind of use a hand blender or something just to kind of get it nice and smooth again, because it might separate a little bit at that point. But the soup is really, really good. It's really rich and flavorful. It tastes like chanterelles, which is what I want my chanterelle soup to taste like. All I taste is chanterelles. And that's a happy thing. People always ask me, can I add this? Can I add that? Can I add onions? Can I add garlic? Can I add this herb? Can I add this flavor? Can I add whatever? You can add anything you like to this. The whole.
Put that on the floor.
I'm sorry?
So people were asking if reducing it after you add the fat, do you need to, is it going to separate all?
Yeah, I would reduce it before you add the fat. If you reduce it after you add the fat, it'll probably separate a little bit and you'll need to blend it again to make it come back together, or whisk it a little.
What about adding coconut milk?
Yeah, you can absolutely do this with coconut milk too. I would use coconut. I would use coconut cream or something, because you want the fat. You want the fat provide some of the texture, but you can use anything you like. If you want to use almond milk, whatever. Think of this as just a basic technique. And this right now, I just have the simple creamy soup. Normally when I serve this soup, I might have different herbs, or I might have, what I'll do is I'll usually set aside some mushrooms and saute them by themselves, and then I'll toss them back in as I'm serving the soup after I blend it. So then I have the big chunky bites in it also. But it just depends on what you're going to use it for. And the same technique.
Where's Matthew?
So this same technique, if you just make it a little thicker, this is a great creamy mushroom sauce for anything. If you want to make a creamy mushroom sauce for pasta or to put on something, this same technique works wonderfully. And again, you saw how easy it is. It's just all about the mushrooms. It's a really simple technique. So, yeah.
There was a question about a non-dairy version.
So this is not. So this version I'm showing you is totally non-dairy. There's no dairy in this at all. All I'm using, this is totally vegan. All I used is olive oil. This is the fat in here. It's just olive oil. It's just olive oil, water, and mushrooms. There was a little bit of wine, a little bit of salt, and I put a sprig of thyme in there. That's all that's in here. There's no dairy. You can make this with cream. You can make this with coconut milk. You can cook your mushrooms in bacon fat. You can do it however you want. But I wanted, the point of this is that the point of this is about the technique. And again, it's much more fun when you can taste stuff. But the point of the technique is that you don't need all that heavy cream and that stuff. If you like it, use it, but you don't need it. You can do this with just olive oil. Where I live in California, I have to cook for a lot of vegans. So it's nice to have this kind of trick where I can do things and I don't need to use all those other ingredients. And cream's expensive too. So when I'm trying to save money at a restaurant, it's definitely easier to do it this way. So again, now I've shown you a million different things. Does anybody have questions about any of this stuff? I kind of want to take a break just so I can eat. This is really good. Okay, so I have the one thing I was going to finish is the trumpet jam. But I have, let me make a little space on the counter here. And I have one other thing I was going to show you guys. So there's still a little bit of liquid. There's still a little bit too much liquid in the in the pan with the trumpet jam, so I'll let it go for a few minutes, and I'll show you the one last thing I wanted to show you here. So again, chanterelles are one of these things that everybody has. So I like to use this for this example. Figure out where I put them. Yeah. So one of the things that I love to do to preserve mushrooms that you guys probably haven't seen if you haven't seen me doing it, is I like to candy mushrooms. And when I say candy mushrooms, I mean exactly what you think I mean. I mean, get them full of sugary, syrupy goodness and completely change their character that way. And in here, these are chanterelles that I had candied in the past. And to candy these, to candy mushroom,
Okay.
oh, sorry. So to candy mushrooms, it's like candying a lot of other things. You're basically going to start. I usually go by weight. It's always more accurate to go by weight when you can. And I usually go 3 parts mushrooms to 2 parts sugar, and just put the mushrooms in whatever size pieces you want. If they're like this, you can leave them whole.
By weight or volume?
I'm sorry.
They're asking weight or volume?
I'm saying by weight. So by weight, I usually go 3 parts mushroom to 2 parts sugar. And then I'll just mix the mushrooms with the sugar, and I'll just pour water over the top. And I'll do them, if I have a lot, I'll do them in a pan like this. If I don't have a lot, I'll do them in a smaller pan. But just cover the whole thing with water, and then just put them on the stove and bring it up to a simmer and just let it simmer down. When it'll take a while, probably take a couple hours. But when the liquid starts reducing down a lot and it starts to get a syrupy consistency, then you're done. You can just take it off the heat. And at that point, the syrup will be in the mushrooms and the mushroom flavor will be in the syrup. And this works, again, chanterelles with their fruity flavor. They have this aroma a lot of people always describe as apricot and other kind of similar fruits. And that aroma is preserved really well when you candy them. And so it kind of changes them almost into a sweet fruit. It's a really cool way to use them for desserts. There are a lot of other mushrooms. I'm sorry, I'm trying to just keep an eye on this pan. There are a lot of other mushrooms that aren't necessarily strong flavored, where you can infuse flavors into them. I'm not sure which jelly fungus you have there, but a lot of the jelly fungus are kind of tasteless, but they're cool textured. I don't know if you have the pseudohydnums there. Out here they call them cat's tongue, where they're little jellies. You can infuse flavors. You can take your syrup and put citrus peel or vanilla or pretty much any kind of flavor you want into the syrup, and then you can infuse that into the mushrooms. And it makes really cool garnishes for cocktails or for desserts. It works really well for the little waxy caps, the little small hygrophorus that are kind of most Americans walk on by and ignore. Some of those actually work really well for candying. Here we have a few Amandia agaricus that can be really common at times. This works really well for the Amandia agaricus.
Asking how long does this preserve?
Oh, so when they're candied, they keep a long time in the fridge, easily weeks and weeks. As long as you don't see mold on top, they're fine. But I usually just take containers like this and I throw them in the freezer. And in the freezer, I have a chest freezer in the garage. And it's half of it is, a pig I got from somebody, a lamb I got from somebody, but the other half of it is stuff like this. And once you freeze them in the freezer, the containers of these last forever, years and years. I have stuff like this from years ago that I pull out still that are fine, as good as the day I put them in there. So the other thing, so I was going to show you one really simple thing that you can do with these that I've been doing a lot lately. It's a fun thing that you can do for dinner parties, and you can use whatever you have around besides the candied mushrooms, and that's just making a really simple parfait. So I have this really fancy martini glass. I never drink martinis, but I love using it for stuff like this. So parfaits just look really nice, and they're so easy to make. So I'm just gonna put a layer of the candied chanterelles on the bottom. I'm gonna make sure some of the syrup goes in there with them.
Yeah, somebody's mentioning pavlovas.
Yeah, seriously, your imagination is the only limit once you have them. Pavlovas are great. In the book, there's a bunch of different recipes where I take candied mushrooms, puree them up, and then add them to batters for things like cakes. There's actually a chanterelle jelly roll in the book where there's candied chanterelles in the dough, in the batter for the cake, but there's also the jelly is also the candied chanterelles. So there's all kinds of things you can do with them. So this on top here, I put a layer of whipped cream. This is just cream I had whipped earlier. You can put a cookie layer. I just have some walnuts here I'm putting in a layer. These are just some strawberries that I had macerated, just really simply cut them up and toss them with sugar. So the liquid coming out is just the juice from the strawberries. And then just another layer of cream. And I'm gonna put another layer on top. You know, you can do this in a tall, skinny glass. You don't need very much stuff, and you can make a really, lots of layers of stuff. I'm gonna keep this really simple for time and just put some nice mushrooms sitting on top. My whipped cream's starting to melt a little, so they sunk in. But you can see how this looks really cool, and it's really, really delicious too. It's super, super simple. Again, I'll do cookie layers in here sometimes, but the candied mushrooms themselves are so delicious that they're kind of the star of this. They're the star of this. I'm sorry, I gotta stop eating so I can talk to you guys. But so, does anybody have any questions about that specifically before I jump back to something completely different? Because I'm going to do that again to you.
What's the most unusual thing you've candied?
Oh, I know the answer to that. So I don't know if you have them on the East Coast, but here we have these, the common name for them is jelly babies.
Oh, the grapes.
And there's Leucia lubrica, I believe is the Latin name for them. I could be remembering that wrong. And I just remember seeing them, they grow really commonly at the same time as black trumpets. And sometimes when you're picking black trumpets, you see lots and lots of them. And Rosa described them, the first time she saw them, Rosa described them as little grapes on a stick. And they kind of do look like little grapes on a stalk, and little green grapes on a stalk. And so I thought it was so funny when she said that I wound up collecting a whole lot of them, and I candied them actually in grape juice, and wound up using it. I made a salad. There's kind of a salad I like to make with almonds and celery and grapes. That's kind of a standard thing in my repertoire. And I used actually those candied. Those jelly babies candied in grape juice for that salad, and that's probably the strangest one, or at least that you guys would find strange.
Right, that is strange. I didn't know those were edible.
So there is some discussion about that. So, and I don't know if you know Dennis Benjamin.
Yeah.
He wrote a book about toxicology, and he's pretty well known in the community. But I talked to him about it, and what he told me is this, because I heard mixed things about it. And what he told me was that
Dennis Benjamin.
Yeah, Dennis Benjamin, it's one N. But what he told me is that there are reports that they contain a small amount of gyrometrin, which is the same chemical as the false morels. the Geometria genus. But the amount is pretty small, kind of like some other species that are considered edible but contain that. So the big thing with them is they definitely need to be cooked thoroughly in kind of, open air, but they're not, I wouldn't suggest anybody eat lots and lots of them. And I definitely would never suggest anybody eat them without thoroughly cooking them. But I think in moderation, they're, in moderation and cooked properly, they're fine. That's the short version, I think. Because when I talked to him, he went digging for papers and he couldn't find anything on toxicity. He couldn't find any reports of toxicity. And I've talked to other people who've eaten them as well. But yeah, I would say again, in moderation, there's a lot of things in those. Yeah, I wouldn't eat tons of it, but in moderation, they're fine. So I wanna finish this trumpet jam now really quickly here. And feel free to keep coming with questions if you have more questions. So to finish this trumpet jam, I have, I'll remind you what was in the pan because I haven't talked about it for a long while. And I've talked about a lot of things since then. So I started with just some onion and fennel, which I cooked down really slowly until it was caramelized. And then I added reconstituted black trumpets that were dried black trumpets that I reconstituted in water. I also added their soaking liquid, and I added some brown sugar, and I added a little bit of vinegar. And everything, a little pinch of salt, but not a lot of salt. This one's not really intended to be very salty. So all I'm gonna do really, I'm just gonna take my hand blender, if I can find it. And I'm gonna buzz this for a second, and it's really that easy. And I had a little more liquid in this pan, which I was trying to reduce down because it was a little too much. So let me blend this real quick and then I'll talk a little bit about it. So Rosa, just mute for like 10 seconds. This won't take very long. Okay, so let me talk about this for a second and then I'll go back to the candied stuff. So let me find a spoon that's not full of other things. So at this point, you'll see it pretty much looks like a jam. And because it's black trumpets, it has a really deep dark color. This is red hot, boiling hot. It just came out of the pan, so I really don't want to put this whole spoon in my mouth because I want to be able to taste things tomorrow. But it's one of those things that's hard to describe. I love bringing this to parties and stuff when it's not mushroom people and trying to explain to them what it is, because they're always trying to figure out what fruit it is. People always, again, it's got that sweet, sour thing, but it's also got a little earthy element because of the trumpets. It tastes like black trumpets, just not in the way you're used to tasting them. But people always ask, so what would I do with this jam? And so this particular jam is really good with like cured meats. It's really good with a bunch of different cheeses. I love eating it with cheese. I made this a couple weeks ago, and I had some chicken liver pate in the fridge, and it was incredibly good with the pate. It's one of those things, again, put it out with your cheeses, put it out with your kind of, cured meats like salami and things like that. It's really good with that kind of stuff. There are other jams I do with different mushrooms and other kind of marmalade kind of things that I use for other things, but this specifically, that's what I would use it for. So, okay, so there was a question before when I was blending this. Now I'm ready to eat the rest of this spoonful. No, I'll say also a lot of times with this, I'll just eat it on crackers by itself. It's pretty delicious on crackers just by itself as a snack. I do that a lot. But so the question was, have I ever candied witch's butter? And yes, witch's butter by itself tastes like nothing. It is pretty much tasteless. So that is definitely one of the things, if you candy it, flavor the syrup. And again, you can flavor it with cinnamon, you can flavor it with vanilla, you can flavor it with citrus, you can just use juice to candy it. Whatever spices you like. And witch's butter is a cool one if you flavor it, you know, again, like I talked about with doing the jelly babies, you can, if you do it with kind of a fruity thing, you can use it like toss as a garnish on salads. It's pretty cool. If you've ever tried to cook witch's butter, you know that you probably didn't find it again in the pan when you were done because it shrinks to nothing. So I wouldn't suggest cooking it after you candy it. But one thing you can do also with the jelly fungus, witch's butter probably will shrink a little too much, but with some of the other ones, like again, the pseudohydnum, if you have that there, it's really common in the Rockies and West. And I'm not sure if it appears in the East, but it that one, a lot of times you can candy it, flavor it with whatever you want, and then dehydrate it, and you wind up with kind of mushroom gummy bears. They have the texture of gummy bears after you dehydrate them, and they'll be sweet and flavored however you want them. So that's a pretty fun thing that you can do with candied mushrooms as well.
So
I've
somebody
only found one in the East Coast.
Yeah. So okay. So pseudohydrums are the best. But you can try that with the witch's butter as well. You just want to keep checking it in the dehydrator and make sure it doesn't shrink away completely. But I think
That's cool.
it should work. With the tremolo, I know people do it with some tremolo species. I've seen it done.
So yeah, somebody was asking if you would suggest to use the jam with charcuterie.
Oh yeah, this jam is fantastic with a variety of charcuterie stuff. That's my favorite use for it is with charcuterie. I've served it that with all kinds of different charcuterie stuff. Like I said, that pate I had it with recently was probably the best match for that kind of pate I've had in a long, long time. So, let me say this. So I've covered a lot of stuff, and I've been talking for about an hour and 15 minutes or more. I've covered everything I intended to cover. I will stay and talk to you guys as long as you
Okay,
want.
the sound is weird again. Let me mute you and unmute again.
It isn't just us.
Is the sound any better now, or it's still funky?
It's still
Is
fun.
it better?
So funky.
Still funky?
Should we log out?
Should
and
we
in again?
log out and in again real quickly? That seemed like
It worked last time. Let's do it again.
Okay, so just be ready to let us back in.
Yep. Lots of people do.
Yeah. Got me with my mouth full. Excuse me. Can you hear me now?
It's great. It's back to
Okay.
normal.
Well, Indra, it's good to know that works because this seems to be a common Zoom thing. So, was there a question that I was interrupting?
No, you were saying
Okay,
that
so-
you
so-
covered everything you wanted.
Yeah. So again, I was going to do a quick wrap up, and then I was going to let you guys, and I'll stay and answer questions as long as anybody wants. I have nowhere to be but here. As long as you don't mind me eating my food while I'm talking to you, I'll stay as long as everybody wants. But so I was just going to say again, there's not a sales pitch, but the presentation's the sales pitch. If you like what I showed you here today, that's what the book is about. I showed you like 5 things today. There's 120 recipes in the book, more or less. If you're interested in the book, it's The Mushroom Hunter's Kitchen. My website is themushroomhunterskitchen.com. And there's no punctuation, there's no apostrophe, just themushroomhunterskitchen.com. If you buy it from me directly, it's about $5 cheaper than if you buy it from Amazon. And it's also better for me because Amazon doesn't take the money. So it's win-win. So if you want a book, I would suggest buying it directly from me. But that's as much of a sales pitch as I'm going to give you.
And there's a question,
again-
is there any way, a favorite way to use hedgehogs?
So which hedgehogs do you have there? Because do you have the kind of big, what they call the sweet tooth? I don't even know. Somebody just published a paper with new species names.
They
so
have
I'm thoroughly
there's
confused.
mostly the belly buttons.
So belly buttons. So belly buttons, I like the belly buttons much better actually. So I'm glad you said that. So the belly buttons, I just love sauteed really simply in butter. I think belly buttons or in olive oil for that matter. They have so much flavor. I use them a lot the way I use chanterelles. The belly buttons I've never played with them in sweet stuff like I do with chanterelles, but for any savory application where you use chanterelles, I think the belly buttons are a great substitute. And actually genetically, they're pretty closely related. But they just have that same kind of rich flavor that chanterelles does, minus the fruitiness and the same kind of, they're actually fantastic for a soup like this. But yeah, does that answer the question, hopefully?
Yeah, they were asking if there's any special way to use the belly buttons. That's not the usual, but yeah, they said,
no,
yes, thank you.
Yeah, I with the belly buttons, I tend to not alter them that much. I mean, again, I might do something like use them for this kind of soup or puree, but I love the flavor of them so much. I think they're one of the best flavored mushrooms there is. So I tend to not doctor the flavor too much. I mean, I might use them to make some, I might saute them and make a duxelles out of them where I kind of puree up the thing a little bit, use it for a pasta stuffing or to stuff a fish or a chicken breast or something like that. But I tend to not mess with them too much, just a little bit of, garlic and parsley to make Rosa happy because she insists on that with everything. But yeah, they're so good on their own. I usually don't mess with them very much. So, any other questions?
So Chad, have you done any sweet preparations with Matsutake? Does it survive like the heating?
Yeah, so do you guys have Matsutake there?
I know people who have picked them in Tennessee.
Okay. Oh, that's right. Because the northwest border, you're right up in Tennessee. Yeah, so I have one recipe in the book for actually a Matsutake that's kind of a strudel with Matsutake and with Matsutake and pear. So my experience with Matsutake is that when you get them a little bit sweet, it brings out the kind of, so let me back up a second. So Matsutake have kind of two main flavors to me. And the first one is that kind of spicy cinnamon flavor. And the second part is kind of this musky, funky thing. And it's the blend of those two aromas that kind of make the Matsutake essence. And for me, what I found is a little bit of sweet really brings out the musky, funky part of it. So you need a lot of sweet to get past that to bring out the cinnamony part. That's what I found. So when I talked about doing candying mushrooms, and I said I do 3 parts mushroom to 2 parts sugar, with Matsutake, I actually go 1-to-1 with the matsus and the sugar. I think they need more sweetness, or you get a little too much of that musky kind of flavor. That's what my experience has been. But Matsutake, I love Matsutake. To me is a very natural pair with apples and pears and such. I think they go really well with those. And actually, there's one of my favorite salads that I love to make that's in the book is a Matsutake and apple salad, just shaved Matsutake, shaved raw Matsutake with apples in a salad.
And you said you have the fruit jam too.
Oh yeah, and actually, that's right, Rosa reminds me. One of my favorite things with Matsutakes, which doesn't make for a good demo when you can't taste it. But if we were tasting it, it's something I love for people to taste. Is I like to make a jam with matsutakis and figs.
Oh my
And
goodness.
and this one came about very much by accident. One of my friends, one of my good friends, has a wholesale mushroom business, and he came to me one day where he had just a mountain of matsutake that were about to turn, and he didn't know what to do with them, and he was basically worried he was going to throw them out. And I had a mountain of figs at that time, and I was just like, what the heck, let's try it. And I did this jam. That the jam is basically just figs, a little bit of sugar, a little bit of vinegar, and the matsutake.
Wow.
And the matsutake gives this intense kind of spice to the jam. I mean, it's really surprising. It comes across like people think there's ginger in it. And it's just the matsutake. It's really, really good. And that's one of those things, I would throw that into this parfait if I had it right now. Like, that's delicious with all kinds of sweet stuff, actually. I would put that on ice cream. I would eat that on a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, actually.
Actually, I guess we could open up people's video and
yeah, if people
unmute
want to.
them.
I mean, again, I'm happy to hang out. If you guys don't mind me eating while I talk to you, because I can't resist all this food in front of me.
Question, any words on grilling mushrooms?
Yes. So grilling mushrooms. It depends a lot on the mushroom, but in general, the advice I would give you is this. You want kind of lower, more indirect heat when you're grilling mushrooms. So you cook them more slowly. If you cook them too fast, you'll just kind of burn the outside and the inside won't really break down and cook very much. So the big thing is just kind of slow, indirect heat. But a lot of mushrooms grill really well. Matsutake, for example, is fantastic grill. What's that?
Rovellón.
Oh yeah, where Rosa's from in Catalonia, the most prized mushroom. They will run past the chanterelles, they'll run past the morels, they'll run past the ceps or porcini to get to Lactarius deliciosus group stuff.
Wow.
One of their favorite ways to do those is just grilled over an indirect flame very slowly. But porcini, boletes, whatever, everybody has so many common names for those. I'm not sure what to call them when I talk to different groups. But the boletus species grill really well, and Garricus species grill really well.
Yes, somebody says that.
Lactarius grill really well.
Amy is saying that there's people roasting, grilling lion's mane.
Oh, that's interesting. I have never tried grilling any of the Parisians before, but that's super interesting.
Now I'm unmuted, so.
That's super interesting. I'd love to try that.
So you get coralloides out there, right? The one that looks like a coral.
Yeah, so we get coralloides and we get arenaceous, and we have another one that I don't think you have there. Which
We've actually tempura'd both the coralloides, which is awesome, but also taking the arenaceum and kind of making a chunk with just the spines and some of the flesh. Those are both awesome, done tempura style.
I've never tried that. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, it's really,
That sounds good, Cornelia.
yeah, because you want like a little bit of crispy spine and some of the flesh. And I made like a orange sesame chili dipping sauce. It was really good.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. I might try that next time I get it. Yeah, that's really cool. I like that idea.
Okay.
Right. And people can unmute themselves and ask a question if they want. So
Yeah, anything anybody
okay.
wants to talk.
Cornelia or
Kathleen, yes.
have you ever cooked not candy caps, Lactarius?
Well, candy, are you talking about candy caps?
Well, not the candy ones, the ones that smell like fish.
Oh, Bradley.
Lactifluous.
Yeah.
Lactifluous, yes. So we don't
Those are
have,
delicious.
we don't have the mushroom on the West Coast, but we do have that. When I was on a trip back east a couple years ago, I collected a bunch of that mushroom, and I actually enjoyed eating it quite a bit. I sauteed that one up several times. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, I've had it with tomatoes.
So to me, that mushroom is actually very similar to the Lactarius deliciosus group. And I mean, the flavor is a little different, but it's similar, and the texture is pretty much exactly the same. And for those, one of the standard things we do in our house is we'll just do what I like to call a wet saute. For the Lactarius and Rusula, if you cook them fast, they have a really grainy texture that you need to break down. And there's a reason that gets into the whole biology of the mushroom and the shape of the cells and all that, but not important. But the important part is if you cook them slow and wet a little bit, it breaks down that graininess and you get a really nice texture. So again, I do what I call a wet saute, which means I'll throw them in a pan and then I'll actually add a little bit of water to the pan to make sure they actually get completely covered by the water. And then when that water cooks off, just like with the dry saute, then I'll add the fat. And with that, and with the Lactarius like that one, and with the Deliciosus group Lactarius, in our house, again, where Rose is from, that is the prized group of mushrooms, and they, it's just finished with some garlic and a little bit of parsley. And in my experience, those mushrooms do not need to be brown very much. They're better if like you just get them cooked where they just are barely starting to brown a little bit and then take them off. Like I find that if you brown them, they kind of get a little bitter and unpleasant. So
There's a mention to salting.
okay, so salting mushrooms is a big long topic all on its own. I talk about it in the book. It is something I like to do, but I do it in a very untraditional way. So I guess I should say what salting mushrooms is, because some people probably have no idea. So there is it's a popular technique all over Eastern Europe and in Scandinavia. And the idea is to preserve mushrooms. They do it mostly with Lactarius and Rusulas. And in most of the countries that do it, they do it indiscriminately. They'll pick pretty much every Lactarius and Rusula and throw it in there, including all the ones we're told we should never eat. But so usually every single recipe I've ever seen for it is different than every other recipe. I think every family does it a little differently, let alone every village or every country. A lot of people, most recipes, they'll call for either soaking the mushrooms in changes of water over the course of hours or days, or just boiling the mushrooms first, either of the two. I don't really have the space to have baths of water set up, so I usually just boil them first. And then you can salt them. Then you just basically pack them in salt, layer them in salt. And you can put in whatever spices and herbs and flavorings you want in there when you pack them in the salt. I usually leave them kind of plain because I use them a little differently than most people. The way most people do them, where they actually kind of get the salt at an appropriate level for fermentation. So kind of, which is roughly like 4% salt by weight versus mushrooms. Something in that range, kind of your typical, lactic fermentation like you would do for sauerkraut or something. I have never been super impressed or happy with the results I've gotten doing that and fermenting mushrooms, and I've tried it with a variety of mushrooms. I've just never been really happy with the results. Like the best results I got were kind of, it's edible. So it's something that I've never really gotten into, but what I found I really like doing, and by the way, if anybody has recipes like that they do regularly that they're really happy with, I'd love to see them because I'd love to play with it. But what I found myself doing with salting mushrooms, and this is what I talk about in the book, is I will put way too much salt in for fermentation. And so it just pack them in salt. And so there's no fermentation. It's too much salt for anything to live in there, no bacteria. And in the end, I wind up using them like I would use salt cod. If anybody's from an area where salt cod or bacalhau is popular, I use them as a vegetarian substitute for that. And they work really, really well for all kinds of things like that. One of the things actually that I love showing people that's not a salt cod substitute, but one of the things I love to do with salted Rucola or Lactarius is a hummus, where I'll make a hummus that's just made from salted mushrooms with no chickpeas. But the rest of it's a standard recipe. I love serving that to people. That's one of those things, again, it's not much to show you as a demonstration, but it's one of those things I love to have people to taste when I'm doing things face to face. So that was a very long-winded answer to your question, but it's a big topic.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Chad,
So Chad, we do have a member who regularly salt cures Lactarius. It's Amy right here.
yeah, actually, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah,
Yes.
I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, actually, I have your cookbook,
Yes, you have it.
and I got the idea of like using like an inordinate amount of salt on Lactarius from that, and I actually ran to my fridge. I have like, I don't know if you can see this. It's really dark here.
Wow.
Yes, yes, you can.
Voluminous and Corgus. Here, let me turn on the light real quick. But yeah, what I noticed is it completely changes. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just, I mean, you can't even see how much salt was in here because it's like under liquid at this point.
Yeah. You wind up with a brine in there, pretty much a really salty brine soaks out of the mushrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, but it does. I think it completely changes the texture from like being super grainy to being more chewy.
Yeah.
We use them in stews. We like, we'll like change the water for, like a few times a day for like a day or two to get the salt level down. And yeah, it's really delicious in stews and stuff. But that was a great tip.
No, thank you. Yeah, so exactly like she just said. After they're salted, if you want to use them for various things, you need to soak them in water, just like if you were using salt cod. They're generally a lot smaller, so they're not going to take days like a big piece of fish would. But yeah, they're great in stews. Oh, now I know what I was going to say. You talked about the way the texture changes. One of the things with Lactarius and Rucola, I mentioned the wet saute. You can parboil them, and it's the same thing. When you parboil Lactarius and Rucola, it improves the texture a lot.
Yeah.
If you're worried about losing and that's I think where the texture change is really happening in that process when you do that parboil. They go from being grainy to being like this really pleasantly chewy textured mushroom. The meaty Lactarius and Rucolas like that get really nice after you get them cooked through in like boiling water, or again like the wet saute kind of method. But that's cool. It makes me happy to see that jar. I need to collect a bunch more myself. I'm all out of salted mushrooms now because I always share them with everybody, and I don't have any left. So that makes me happy seeing that.
I'm curious if you've tried salting Hericium, because it already has kind of a fishy, because you talked about the cod, the bacalhau, Hericium has kind of a fishy smell. So I'm wondering if you've done that.
I understand the question. I haven't. The only mushrooms I've tried salting are various Lactarius and Rucola. And I've tried it with a lot of different ones of those. But I've never tried it with anything else, really. You bring it up, and it sounds pretty interesting because, I think of Hericium as seafood, as basically vegan seafood.
Right. So vegan bacalhau.
Yeah. Exactly. It's an interesting idea. I have no idea what it would do texturally, but if you have extra, it's certainly worth trying.
Yeah. Well, since it's cultivatable and pretty readily available, I am trying that next.
Yeah, actually, next time I know a few people who grow it. Now that you say that, I got to see if I can get a bit of it and try it myself. It's an interesting idea.
Cool. When are you going to feed Rosa?
As
As soon as we hang up.
yeah, that's
Okay.
right. You guys are torturing Rosa. She's watching.
Uh-oh.
I'm fine, I'm
Oh,
fine.
it is 9 o'clock actually, so.
No, but here we're on the West Coast. It's only 6 o'clock here.
We're
Wow.
good.
So
Thank you.
So we just thought we'd see if anybody has any more questions.
yeah.
Or, there's appreciations coming up in the chat for sure.
Could,
So.
could we see Rosa?
It was great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
David was asking if we can see you too, Rosa.
Okay, so let's do that. Let's do the selfie mode. And we'll go together. Okay.
She's shy. She won't do it alone.
Yay.
All right.
This has been so delicious. Just thank you so much.
Thank you. So let me just thank everybody for having me.
Now I'm the selfie. Okay.
So the 2020 has been kind of a crazy year, and as bad as some things are, I probably never would have connected with you guys and been able to present to you had 2020 not been such a strange year. So it's fun for me to get to meet new groups of people, and like I said at the beginning, I hope to get a chance to come and join you guys in Georgia sometimes. I would love to learn some of the stuff you have there. I don't know the Southeast at all. So
Yeah.
And we can arrange for you to do an in-person cooking demo.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, Sam.
Some people are asking what's your restaurant status?
So so let me just finish that last thought. We can talk offline some point about that. I would love to do it next year or the year after when things are a little more normal. Because again, I have family in Florida, so getting to Georgia is very easy from there. I can combine trips.
And don't forget that NAMA is going to be in Colorado next year if it happens, the weekend before Telluride. So
I'm counting on it. We talked briefly about this. I would love to be there. If you want me, I am there.
Nama and Telluride be at the same time.
Yeah, this
Because
is
I
a
should-
4-H
I should-
chair.
One
So.
after the other.
Yeah, I should be at Telluride, so I would
We have
love
to
to be
go
able
back
to.
to Colorado.
yep, NAMA's the weekend before.
Okay, yeah, that sounds wonderful. So there's somebody asked about restaurant status. I have been freelancing the last couple of years, so I'm not in a restaurant. I would never be able to do this stuff in a normal time frame if I were in restaurants. Restaurants are a great place to learn how to cook really well, but they're a really bad place to be if you want to have a life.
Yeah.
I'm not being serious. I am very grateful for my restaurant experiences, but it's a really tough way to live. My slow weeks in restaurants were 80 hours a week. So I mean, slow weeks. So
That sounds brutal.
Yeah, exactly. It is brutal. So these days I'm kind of doing, like I said, freelancing. So I'm doing a lot of, well, I mean, right now, the last few months, not doing a lot of anything, but like pop-up dinners and mushroom dinners and catering and private parties and things like that. And it's fun for me because it's a different sort of thing. Every event is very different than the last. So it's a lot more fun and a lot less, it feels a lot less like a prison sentence when I'm at work. So.
Oh, golly. Yeah.
Okay. We should probably say goodbye. Actually, we should. Some people. Any new books on the way? Somebody was asking.
So, I am not working on a new mushroom book right now. I have some more recipes and stuff that are not in the book that'll wind up in something eventually. But I feel like after I put this book out, a few other people have. I don't think anybody could ever have the complete word on this subject. I think the subject is infinite. And there were a lot of things that I think had never been said that I wanted to say. And I feel like I did what I wanted to do with the book. So I'm kind of right now with my Spanish wife here. I've been really diving into regional Spanish food, and my next big book project is probably related to that. There will definitely be mushroom related stuff in there because that culture is very much into wild mushrooms. So there will be some new, interesting, fun mushroom stuff there. But my next project is not going to be full-time mushroom. So it doesn't mean I stop loving mushrooms or I want to stop doing this stuff. I am so insanely grateful for everything I've gotten out of mushrooms and the mushroom communities and stuff over the last few years. I don't ever think I'll stop being in love with mushrooms, but I don't think there's another book coming that soon.